Well, hello, everybody. My name is Rick Burton. I'm the David B. Falk Professor of Sport Management at Syracuse University. I'm a pretty regular contributor to Sportico, and I teach an esports class at Syracuse, which should, for many of you, mean that I really don't know as much about what I'm talking about as I ideally would. But I've got three great panelists that are with me today, and I think that the discussion we're going to have against the title of Maximizing Audience Growth is really going to be an exciting one. I'm going to start with Rishi Chadha, Global Head of Gaming Content and Partnerships for Twitter, Arnold, the Chief Operating Officer for Gen.G, and Johanna, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Call of Duty Activision Blizzard. Panelists, great to have you here with us. And I know the three of you know each other, and I'm kind of the outlier who hasn't been to the parties that you guys have gone to. But Johanna, let me ask you first, this topic, which is kind of vague, maximizing audience growth, is an interesting one for me because some of the people watching don't know a lot about esports. They know it's a phenomena. They know it's all around them. They know they should know more. And then there are people on this Zoom or on this session that really know the business pretty closely. So when I say, how do we think about holistically maximizing audience growth for esports, where do you go with that question?
It's a huge question. It's a question we ask ourselves a lot, certainly in partnership with Arnold and with Rishi in different ways. So we each probably come at it from a different angle, but it's the network effect of what I often draw parallels to with underground movements that have been in existence for many decades that have now achieved massive scale, but haven't really converted to mainstream. What we're seeing with esports is we're at the inflection point where now with each passing month, even you start to see more and more mainstream platform partners, media platforms, different brand sponsors, different venues being designed for an esports type of opportunity. That was not the case even when I joined Activision Blizzard 3 years ago. I mean, so there's this rapid transition moment that we each are in and sort of witnessing. I think the way we think about audience aggregation is not dissimilar in many ways to how you might think about how do you galvanize a digital first audience to watch anything, frankly. But what's interesting about this consumer base is that they're coming with a very ingrained and entrenched attachment to gameplay. And to think of them not now only as individual players in an ecosystem, but now as attenders of live competition events or viewers, the way we would think about ratings when I used to work at the NFL, is just a new headspace. Not only it's an opportunity to drive ancillary revenue for publishers like ourselves at Activision Blizzard, which is why we were big believers and big investors in esports as a business, a standalone business that can one day be profitable. But you also think about, well, where do you find those audiences and how do you speak to them in new ways that extend their interaction with our IP as maybe now a spectator consumer? Of course, some of them have the aspiration of going pro, but they know that that's few and far between. So the mass audience appeal is really about the cross-section of the right media platforms, the right ways to speak to this next-gen consumer, and the right way to think about aspiration funnels such that they are very interested in the opportunity to be a fan of a team, of a pro athlete. It just so happens that they're doing it in a gaming IP infrastructure. But there's not much more different that I would say. It's just the math equation of how long will that marathon take for all of us to really see it go mainstream in a big way.
You mentioned your time at the NFL, and I think maybe it would help the viewers if each of you would maybe do a couple of seconds on your background. So let me start with you, Johanna, and then we'll go to Arnold and Rishi last. So just quick, how would you introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Yes, I started as a sports executive at the NFL. I spent 12 years there, and then I made the jump into esports. And a lot of the reason was for what I sort of said in the first question. There's this opportunity to now apply the approaches, the business models, the engagement models, the fan development models that we were seeing and building and amplifying in traditional sports to gaming communities. And I love Call of Duty, I always have. And now that I really occupy the chair of overseeing the franchise, esports is but one part of a much bigger whole when we talk about Call of Duty engagement, but it's just been such a joy to take what I learned in traditional sports and now serve as a full-time gaming executive.
Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the president of Gen.G Esports. We're an esports organization. Got teams all around the world in Los Angeles, Shanghai, and Seoul. I'm calling in from Seoul right now. Just really quick background on myself. I don't come from a gaming background. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My first job out of school was actually at Goldman Sachs during the mortgage crisis, during the mortgage-backed securities trading desk. Did that for a few years. Moved over to consulting with the Boston Consulting Group. Got the startup itch. Did a startup of my own. Went in like $300,000 of debt. That didn't work out. So I fell in love with tech though. So I joined Google. Worked at Google for a few years. Did another startup, and then long story short, when I was at Google, I was one of the only business guys that was actually playing in all of these League of Legends tournaments that were happening with all the engineers. So I got like a weird reputation as like, who the heck is this kid? That's how I actually got found. And, one thing led to another. And I joined Gen.G Esports when we were starting out of a conference room in the middle of San Francisco. So that's kind of my background in brief. And I'm super excited to be here, especially with Johanna and Rishi.
Thanks so much. Rishi, how about something from you?
Of course. So I've been in the gaming and esports space for over 12 years now. I've had the pleasure of working on a variety of different facets in the space, whether it's early stage sponsorships with the likes of Activision Blizzard, to going over to the early days of the multi-channel networks with Machinima. So pioneering the idea of putting up gameplay content on YouTube and making a living from it. Then going over to the live video space at MLG, Major League Gaming, which is acquired by Activision. And from there, moving into the mobile game space at Mob Crush. Now I've been at Twitter for about 4.5 years now. And I have the pleasure of working with both Johanna and Arnold, and really all of the publishers in the space as far as how they can grow their audiences and engage them in a meaningful and innovative way, but also how they're actually able to build a business on Twitter too. So really thinking about revenue, reach, and innovation, and trying to be at the forefront of a lot of the things Johanna was talking about when it came to how do we push this forward? How do we get more mainstream appeal when it comes to esports? But then also, how do we get brands to monetize? And how do they get them to invest in it too? Because I think one of the things that I wanted to call out was just, there's a crazy stat about the fact that traditional sports fans are being monetized at almost, and in esports, let me take it back and rephrase it. Esports fans are being monetized at such a small fraction of what a traditional sports fan is monetized at. And I think that's like, when you're talking about just the money, that's the opportunity there. The pie is incredibly small right now for esports. And so we really got to be thinking about how we can continue to make it bigger. And I really do believe like Twitter is a great partner for making that happen.
So Arnold, Johanna mentioned the inflection point, and anybody who's gone to business school loves that phrase. What do you think has caused us to come to the inflection point circa, let's call it 2021, 2022? What are your thoughts kind of on what's going on right now? Because there's a famous moment in NFL history with because Johanna worked at the NFL, where Vince Lombardi looks out on the field, the Green Bay Packers are playing, and the famous line is he goes, what the hell is going on out there? So I'm going to ask you that question. If we're at an inflection point, what the hell is going on?
I think the inflection point and what's really exciting about this, and I agree, like I remember when we were first starting our organization, I couldn't even get a meeting with a local Korean sportswear brand, right? And when I finally got the meeting after many connections and many introductions, they offered me like 20 jerseys for free as a sponsor, right? And now we're working with multi-million-dollar deals. Puma, giving them a shout out, is our global partner for all our merch, and we get stuff designed by amazing streetwear designers like Heron Preston. Like the world has changed very quickly in the last 4 or 5 years. I attribute that a lot. And I think a lot of people have very like elaborate theories, but mine's a lot more simple, right? If you look at the bigger wave of gaming and how much it has grown, there basically isn't anybody that doesn't play games, right? Versus when I was playing games when I was much younger, it was not something that everybody did, right? And it's no longer a term it's almost like saying, hey, are you a TV viewer, right? Like that nobody says, oh, I'm a viewer, right? So that's kind of where we've gone as a total industry. And more importantly, in terms of like what's changed now and what's going on with the PR, what's going on with the partnerships, is that finally the people that were like really native to gaming is now actually taking jobs, usually at the senior manager, director level. So they're actually becoming decision makers at a lot of these organizations, right? And, you know, what I saw as a cycle that was really exciting was, you know, there was all this PR buzz around gaming and esports because they needed a topic du jour to talk about. And of course, all the C-level folks was said, all right, I have no idea what this is. My kid plays these games, but hey, go assign somebody to go figure this out and make it big, right? And, you know, when they looked around and for the first time, there was somebody that they respected in the organization that actually was, you know, really understood this. Like, for instance, in Korea, we noticed one person was a huge StarCraft fan when he was growing up, right? And he was now the director of a big, you know, consumer brand. Another person in LA, you know, their kid just absolutely adored Fortnite, right? And, you know, played that every day. So knew something was up. So I think that's the change that happened, was that the meta trend of gaming becoming as big is bigger than TV, right? For the average kid. Then the actual more micro trend of the decision makers, once the C-level people rung the bell, were actually in the company and in the organization, and that allowed kind of this like change that happened. Then after that, you know, the early movers basically have a FOMO effect on the remainder that are sitting behind, and I think that's kind of where the industry has moved forward. And I would just add one more point. I agree with Rishi. I agree with Johanna. The actual business model of esports still sucks, right? Like, it's one of the worst business models I've ever seen. I think I can say that, given that you know, I'm an esports team. So I would say the awareness, the potential has grown leaps and bounds, versus the business model is still stuck 5 years where I saw it last 5 years ago. Need a lot more work needs to be done. It is one of the worst business models that you could ever study in the business world. But, you know, I do think the potential is there, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, Rishi, I think, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to also say, one of the things that contributes to Arnold's point about the business model not being mature is we've actually seen a significant like hyper growth in the past 2 years because everyone was stuck at home and there was no live events. And so what's interesting, and I think a really important call out when it comes to esports, is that esports started in a digital format. So people were always watching a live stream of competitive events. The live components started to come afterwards, right? Whereas with traditional sports, the live events were a big component and then people were watching digitally. And so when the pandemic hit, you know, esports was essentially built for the pandemic to make a quick pivot, and they were doing live, you know, digital events. Like Johanna's team was doing things for the Call of Duty League or the Overwatch League. And then because of that, that's all people could watch is esports content. So there was this new shift in viewership that was increasing because of that. And then you also saw a spike in a lot of traditional sports athletes now started to talk about their fandom and their favorite, you know, the favorite games they're playing. I don't know how many times I heard about NBA athletes missing practice because they were playing Warzone. And so just having those moments happening and all of that really pushed a lot of the growth in terms of viewership and fandom that I think the business is catching up to a little bit now because it grew just so fast. I mean, even for us, looking at the conversation around esports, we saw a 70% increase year over year in the esports conversation. And we actually saw almost like 90% increase in the overall gaming conversation last year. So just seeing those big spikes really is attributed to what's happening in the world and the fact that, you know, we were all stuck at home a bit longer.
And Rishi, you've got a little bit of a background relative to social media. What role is Twitter playing or Twitch, any of these social media platforms in really expanding everyone's awareness?
Yeah. So when it comes to Twitter, what I always like to say is no matter what the video game is or where that video game is broadcast, people are coming to Twitter to talk about it. We are that home of the gaming and esports conversation, and it's very much a second screen experience. So someone could be watching their favorite Overwatch tournament or a Call of Duty League match on YouTube, and they'll have Twitter open, and that's where they're sharing clips and highlights, and they're talking about the excitement of the match. And that's where there's a real conversation happening with their friends. So it's very much that backbone of a place where people can use to connect with their fans. So as an esports team for Arnold, they're using it as a place to connect with their fans, share information and updates, and also a place for driving conversation around all of the things that they're doing while happening that could be happening elsewhere. So it's very much a complementary platform to many of the other platforms out there. And then I think taking a step back and taking the Twitter hat off, we also see that there's been significant viewership trends when it comes to platforms like Twitch and YouTube, and even Facebook with their Facebook gaming initiative. And so we're now seeing just overall games being streamed, is the increase in viewership is continuing to happen, much to what we were talking about earlier when it came to people being at home and now watching their favorite streamers or events. They're using all of these different platforms to do that. And so we're starting to see increased consumption in both live content as well as VOD content as well.
And I want to bring you back in terms of having been at the NFL, whether or not the league is worried about what esports might do to its future generation of fans. And we know that they played around with skins in Fortnite very briefly. I think they were in, then got out, then got in again. But how should the big sports leagues, the NBA has really pushed, I think, well afield with 2K. The NFL always had Madden, or has had Madden for a long time. But should the big pro sports leagues be worried about esports cannibalizing some of their viewer base?
It's almost a yes and no, right? I think it's more about acknowledging, as the points have already been raised, it's not just that that's the next gen consumer preference in many ways, and that it's very, very difficult now to assume that somebody under the age of even 25 is sitting down for appointment broadcast television events. Thank goodness for live sports. It's really the one that has in many ways stood the test of time, but is still seeing, declines, not surprisingly, given just the competition on OTT platforms and what have you. But it's an opportunity, and not just because, what digital platform integration can do to not only make the live sport event experience coincide with these, growing industries like gaming and esports, but the actual player bases in the NFL and in the NHL, MLS, you name it, FIFA, certainly the NBA, they're all, to Rishi's point, playing Call of Duty, and it's just organic to who they are. It's an extension of their identity to do that. You will see countless A-list pro athletes in a Warzone lobby hanging out when they're not, on the field. And that's not just an opportunity for Call of Duty, that's an opportunity for the likes of the NFL or the likes of the NBA to really embrace that and figure out new ways to have conversations that appeal to that, next gen fan who may actually interact with an NBA star through the medium of Fortnite or League of Legends or Call of Duty, and pull them in through a new channel or a new way to excite and, sort of frankly delight them. We actually saw a good example of this to some degree recently, even on Monday Night Football, where we saw ESPN, broadcasting a highlight of Stefan Diggs designing cleats for a cause that's near and dear to him, which was the Call of Duty endowment mission. And it was really to celebrate his passion for COD through the medium of his football cleats. It was, aired in traditional broadcast medium, but drove real social impact for veterans and helping veterans in his community find high-paying jobs. That's a win for everybody, right? And so those are the ways that I think we can start to bridge these as net positives, where it's just another form of conversation and fan development and cross promotion that can have great impact, where all ships really rise together as part of that partnership.
Arnold, you're in Seoul, and we just had the League of Legends World Championship. You've got a team. Put some numbers around how big some of your players are becoming, or how big the viewership is for the world's biggest events. I think for some of the people who don't track closely with esports, I just love to have you take it down to the granular level and say, hey, with Gen.G, this is the kind of stuff we're seeing.
Yeah, sure. I think sorry about that. So I think what's really exciting, and I'll try to take two views on this. I always like to kind of go with the headline, but kind of show you like what's going on the ground. So like the headline is, esports is bigger than traditional sports at the major events, right? You got like hundreds of millions of viewers for every like major championship of the top esports. You know, our players are basically celebrities in Los Angeles. Whenever they're walking around, they're getting stopped all the time. And in Seoul, especially, you know, they've got like subway stops where fans have actually like bought out signs for them just to kind of express their fandom. We've got security patrolling all of our facilities, especially in Seoul, just because of all the fans that come through. But I thought like that's kind of the stuff that like you can kind of read on every headline. But you know, I think a more interesting fact is, well, to the point that Johanna's making about how big this opportunity is and how there's a lot of opportunity that people aren't even realizing. So one thing that's happening is that in Seoul, we've actually created an entire school just for gaming. So we have, you know, kids coming in where they learn to learn how to play games in the morning, and they're learning like math and English and everything in the afternoon, and they're getting a U.S. high school degree so that they can go try to become a pro while not giving up trying to, you know, get a high school degree. Or, of course, you have those kids that come in after school and their parents pay to get them trained in the proper system with our coaches, our software, everything else, just to get them better at games, because it's such an important part of their very being. Just the same way that maybe you and I played basketball, you probably, given that you're in the sports business, played better than I did, versus I got cut from the varsity team. But you know, I would say that's what's really exciting. And just to kind of give you an idea, we started this thing less than a year ago, right? And, you know, a lot of folks have said, oh, you guys are trying to do like the IMG thing where you can like really come in and give them the training at the top level. By next year, we're going to be 10 times bigger than IMG in terms of the number of students that we serve. So we've got this massive opportunity of growing and creating and integrating the culture of sports in interesting ways, where we've studied what IMG is doing. And we said, wait, why does everybody have to go to the middle of Florida near the swamp? Even though the facility is freaking amazing, by the way. But like, why does that barrier exist? And why does it cost so much to go there? You know, growing up, you know, I never saw that. I was a kid growing up in the middle of downtown LA. Like, I never knew there was even these things that you could go to. But I think that's what's really interesting, is that the opportunity is so big that it's not just about the top line viewership numbers. There's actually these real interesting opportunities where you can be kind of that first step to help a lot of parents, to help the industry kind of figure out, hey, how can we actually embrace the total competitive community? Just like Johanna said, like the very top of the pros that are making millions of dollars now, you know, those will be the stories on ESPN and these things talking about, oh, this guy's making $5 million a year. Right. I think the top League of Legends player makes like $7 million a year. Right. But I mean, that's interesting and it's cool, but there's a lot more interesting stories if you dig a little bit deeper. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity as well. So that's kind of my spiel on kind of the macro picture versus what's really going on the ground floor as well.
Rishi, I was going to say that in having a topic like maximizing audience growth, one of the things I suppose someone out there is worried about is whether esports is going to grow too fast, which is somewhat unimaginable. But I think maybe one of the questions here is, you know, is there risk inside this phenomenal growth that anyone has got to be paying attention to? Or is it, if we're at the inflection point, still kind of a Wild West, buyer beware, everybody go for broke? Your thoughts on that?
I would say that we're in a much better place than if you go back to even just looking at the early 2000s and some of the things that were happening with Counter-Strike at that time, and some of the deals that were happening when it came to just broadcasting Counter-Strike content on DirecTV. And just even looking at that, I feel like that was the buyer beware period when it tried to grow way too fast. And I think we've all learned from those moments now and have really thought about, and this actually kind of goes back into Arnold's point too, of we're actually now as an industry spending a lot of time building out the infrastructure. And now there's actually, you know, you've got the headline stories of the pro players, but actually there's also great headline stories about people that can make a living doing esports. So like you can go to school now. And I mean, I remember I went to college and I was originally going to be a doctor. And then I got my ass kicked by OChem and physics. And I realized I'm not going to be a doctor. And I came out during the Great Recession, didn't know what was going to happen. And then I jumped into gaming and my parents were like, you're an idiot. But and as soon as I got the job at Twitter, they finally realized, okay, this is legit. This makes sense. And so I think we're in a really unique place now where every kid could actually say, you know what, I actually want to get a job in esports and I want to do something. And it doesn't mean I have to be a pro player. So the point I'm trying to make is really that now there's real jobs and infrastructure in place, whether it's being in sales, working in marketing, working, as an esports doctor or a psychiatrist, even a chef for teams. Like there's so many things that are now happening that are very legitimate, that there's a proper infrastructure for people to actually feel like if they get into esports, if they get into the industry, there's so many different entry points for them now that it's not a buyer beware situation where it's snake oil and tomorrow it's all going to disappear, because it's very real. And, Johanna comes from the NFL and is experiencing it from both sides of traditional sports and esports. It's become more real than ever.
Yeah, I would, if I can, just build on that point, because I think Rishi is so correct on so many of his points. And to be short about it, I would just say, I've even witnessed that in the last, let's call it 3-4 years that I've made the jump, the sophistication of the skill sets that are coming into this industry is only a net positive. So while back to Arnold's point, a lot of the focus, rightly so, for those of us who have businesses to run, are about profitability and revenue generation and, how quickly can these things turn a profit? Yes, we need to figure that out. And it's not easy to do. But the heavy hitters from across the board, from operational know-how, financial know-how, marketing, everything in between, legal, corporate finance, investor relations, I could go on and on and on, things that you would not typically attach to gaming and esports based on the entertainment product that consumers usually hear about or talk about. That's where the sophistication, to me, is really edifying, because I think that work that isn't as sexy, but it is about infrastructure, it is about maturity, it is about sophistication and thought leadership. Over the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a completely different stage, not only of growth, but of stabilization, I'd argue, at scale for this industry. And it's very exciting to be a part of that.
That's such a great answer. And Arnold, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I think, what both of you guys are saying, in terms of the sophistication and the infrastructure, like actually as part of, owning and operating a team, I spent a lot of time studying, what the sports industry does. Right. Like I actually looked at IMG and I was blown away by what IMG provided, not just the sports curriculum, but kind of the like total athlete curriculum. And they had it really figured out. Like they genuinely cared not about just like, what does the athlete do and et cetera. And you only read about, oh, this guy's a 5-star recruit versus a 4-star recruit. And I think about when are they going to come to the Lakers? But the reality is that it takes a hell of a lot of infrastructure and the right coaching and the coaching of the coaches to be able to create this, right? And whether it's physical wellness, mental wellness, just how you coach and how to be a good role model. These were all things that when I actually looked at and partnered and looking at IMG, I was blown away by how much stuff you learn being an athlete, right? And that's why a lot of these guys come so prepared. And of course there are cases where people don't come prepared. And that's the other part about esports that I think needs a lot of work, is that if I looked at the IMG system versus I looked at our current esports infrastructure system, which is a bunch of dudes literally in a bedroom and just kind of figuring it out, I just saw this massive gap. And that's another great area where there's a ton of opportunity, right? So whether you're a sports psychologist or trying to study to be one, or even a physical training and these kind of things, there's really interesting things that I think cross over. And I think a good way to think about it, and this is one pitch that we gave even to one of our sponsors that makes desks for office workers, was, hey, if you think about esports athletes, in a way, they have a lot of the same problems that office workers do, whether it's like turtling of the neck, wrist problems. So almost like they're like the extreme sports version of the office worker. But it's the same way that I think a lot of the problems they face on mental wellness, physical wellness, right? I think there are interesting opportunities for the traditional sports world and that industry that's built around that infrastructure could actually start crossing over. And I think that's what really got my, a lot of spark coming and inspiration coming from when I looked and studied at IMG.
So we're down to a couple of minutes left. And what I wanted to do was give each of the three of you a chance maybe to either kind of sum us up or cover what we've missed. But I want to steer it back around to our title, this maximizing audience growth, and maybe our position on the return on investment. So Rishi, I'll start with you, but it's a chance, I think, for each of the three of you to maybe sell some of the viewers on the fact that the ROI is going to be pretty significant in this space in the coming years. And that, esports is obviously a growth stock, but it's also maybe a great time to get in and get in because the ROI should be really strong. So Rishi, what have we missed, or what do you want to make sure you leave us with here in these last few minutes?
Yeah, for me, I think one of the most important things as we look towards the continuing growth of the esports ecosystem and the gaming ecosystem at large is I really, really want to see more people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds looking at this industry as a place that they could get involved in and build a career in. I think like I said before, like my parents were scared for me to do this, but I think now it can be a very viable and successful career path. And so what I hope is I want to see more talent I want to see more talented youth get involved in the esports industry at large, and not looking at it just to be pro players, but to be people that can provide a real meaningful impact to the business at large. And I think that's a huge opportunity and a huge growth area. And that's what I want to see continue to grow. And I think in the next 5 years, we'll see a lot of that happen.
Right. Johanna.
I would say back to audience growth, because I've just witnessed it in all these different ways, is exposure. I've seen people, I was one of these people a couple of years ago, but I've literally witnessed people go from 0 to 60 in being able to understand the space and yearn for more and become a fan literally within hours because they walked into a live esports arena and understood it the way that a typical fan might walk into a traditional sports arena or a traditional live concert. And we've lacked some of that. We've been handicapped by 2 years of a pandemic, which makes it even harder to take on world-class live operations, and they are expensive, but they are critically important to galvanizing more of an understanding in mainstream fan development conversations. It's really when you see it, it's really when you engage with the product and the community on the ground in real time that you start to understand it. And not only do you start to understand it, you start to just be completely blown away by, to Arnold's point, the potential, the vectors of opportunity that start to sort of spring off of that experience. So I'm really hungry for not just the broadcast ability to aggregate audience. We're going to continue to do that well. And just as Rishi said, that's sort of in our DNA to do well, even in light of a pandemic. But when we can combine the two and really start to bring people to the live experience, I think we're going to see some major fan adoption. And I'm really thrilled by that opportunity.
Love the answer. Vector speed. It's one of the best speeds you can have, right? So Arnold, you get to sum us up, and then I'll do some kind of a wrap up. But if I don't say it at the end to the panel, thank you so much for being with us and taking the time from really all over the world to be a part of this Sportico event. But Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, I wish, especially for folks that are just learning about the esports space, I would really highly recommend that you come with an open mind. And kind of the opportunity being really interesting. And I'll kind of close it out on my side with a couple stories. So we've been working, for instance, with a school district where there's a lot of at-risk youth, right? And the whole idea is none of these kids probably will go pro. But the idea is, hey, how can we work with these kids at a very young age that love gaming so that they actually have something at school that they actually care about, where they actually want to show up to class? Because at the end of the day, there's this little cool after school thing where they get to start learning how to play games, start engaging with each other, building really cool stuff in Minecraft. Like how do we actually start entering and creating that space? And, we've gotten tons of stories of kids basically saying, yeah, that's the only fun thing that I like about school. And I think that's really great. And the same in our school that we talked about, we had a father-son night. And it was shocking, especially this Korean dad, who's very much like my Korean dad, where he basically was, he asked him like, hey, what made you come to this thing? Like, you don't really seem like the type to like be really engaged in this stuff. And like, he had the best quote that I've ever heard. And I always love this quote. He said, honestly, I usually only have 5 words to say to my kid. Today, I feel like I have 20. And I was like, that's the quote. you know, and I think that's where the opportunity lies. It's tremendous. If we just come with an open mind, I think we can open up a lot more doors. And I think that's one area that I would say, are we moving too fast? I think part of esports moved a little bit too fast and kind of tunnel visioned on how do we become a traditional sport and go into the Olympics and all of this stuff. But, you know, if we come with an open mind about what this business could be instead of like what it should be, yeah, I think that's kind of where a lot more opportunities could open up, and I'm super excited about that.
Well, I tell my students at Syracuse that Ready Player One was set in like 2042, which was only like 20 years from now, and whether or not you buy into the oasis or you buy into how fast artificial intelligence and virtual reality will move, the three of you are at the cutting edge. You're at the forefront of what's going on, and I just think it's a fabulous time to be in this space. And on behalf of everybody at Sportico, I just want to thank you very much for being involved tonight and offering such great insights. And I hope our paths cross again really soon. So thank you to everyone for watching. And we'll turn you back over now to your mainstream hosts.